What's up everyone, Piscean here in this video, or you can just call me the AI astrologer because I come up with some brilliant ideas and I use AI agents to help me fledge out what I'm thinking about. So before we get started, please like, subscribe, comment, share if you dare and care, with peace and love. Also follow me on Instagram at Inferno Cartesian. That's INFERNOCARTESIAN. There will be the ad in the description of this channel. Moving forward, I will be posting reels daily. And let's get into this video. So with the help of Grok AI agent, I was able to fully fledge out this PDF to bring to you guys. And it's basically about, collective consciousness and generational transits. And this is a video I've been wanting to make because there's so much going on here on Earth. And it's a lot to process. But astrology tells us so much, tells us everything we need to know about history, believe it or not. In this video, we're going to go over Pluto and Aquarius, which is going on right now, and it will be for quite a while. Gender ideology is a collective shadow. We're going to talk about PSYOPs architecture. We're going to talk about historical global warfare correlations. We're going to talk about midpoints, orbs, and advanced mundane technique. A rigorous monograph for advanced astrology faculty, which is just my subscribers and viewers. So this work examines the outer planet architecture of collective psyche with special attention to the 2023 through 2044 Pluto and Aquarius transit as a crystallization point for identity politics, as well as technological decentralization and the weaponization of narrative. So historical parallels from 1777 through 1798, as well as 1532 through 1553, and earlier Aquarian Pluto epochs are analyzed through the lens of midpoints. We're going to talk about tight orbs, as well as multi-planet planetary pictures. So the thesis advances that generational transits do not merely correlate with social movements, they supply the archetypal container within which PSYOPs, ideological capture, and mass psychological reorganization become possible. So there is no reliance on secondary popularizations, technical emphasis on cosmobiology grade midpoint orbs, which is going to be lesser than 1 degrees to 1.5 degrees, and case studies drawn from primary historical timelines and contemporary data. So let's get into this. This is very, very important to me. So theoretical framework here is collective consciousness as astrological object. And what that means is the outer planet Uranus, which has an 84-year cycle, as well as Neptune, which has a 165-year cycle. Pluto, which has a 248-year cycle. These function as the primary carriers of generational and civilizational signature because their sign ingresses last years to decades. Every individual born within a given window inherits a shared planetary stamp that operates beneath personal horoscopic differentiation. This is not metaphor, this is a structural concept here. So the same way a language shapes the thinkable for its speakers, an outer planet sign placement shapes the emotional cognitive bandwidth available to a cohort. Liz Green's foundational seminars on the outer planets, later published as The Outer Planets and Their Cycles, established that these bodies describe the interface between individual psyche and the collective unconscious in Jung sense. The present work extends that insight by insisting on precision of orb and midpoint activation as mechanisms by which collective themes become operationally intense rather than diffusely ambient. So here we're going to get into key definitional commitments that are adopted in this video, in this literature. And first is going to be generational planet, which is anybody whose sign tenure exceeds the span of a typical peer cohort's formative years, roughly Uranus and slower. We are also going into collective consciousness, which is the shared, largely unconscious field of assumptions, fears, and idealizations that a generation inherits, later projects onto institutions, media, and identity categories. And then we're looking at PSYOPs correlation. The observable alignment between outer planet configurations and large-scale narrative engineering, propaganda systems, or manufactured consensus. Correlation is not causation, it is structural resonance that can be exploited. Alright, so here is orb discipline for mundane work. Essentially in personal astrology, orbs of 6 through 8 degrees for major aspects are pretty common. For collective work, tolerance must tighten. We see that historical event charts, as well as generational ingresses, show that the most dramatic social crystallizations occur when outer planet aspects or midpoints form within 1 degree to 2 degrees. Cosmobiology, Eberton tradition, insists on orbs of 1 degree or less for midpoint pictures, and present analysis adopts lesser than 1.5 degrees for direct midpoints, and lesser than 1 degree for hard aspect midpoints. So 0 degrees, 45 degrees, 90 degrees, 135 degrees, 180 degrees. Here is the aspect structure, and we see, for example, conjunction opposition has that personal orb of 6 through 10 degrees. And we see mundane collective orb going to be lesser than 2 degrees, and that's preferred. Lesser than 3 degrees is the max. And we see the rationale here is event intensity scales with exactness. For a square and trine, we see personal orb is 5 through 8 degrees, with mundane collective orb being lesser than 1.5 through 2 degrees, and rationale being collective squares require tightness to mobilize massy motion. Sextile quincunx, 3 through 5 degrees personal orb, lesser than 1 through 1.5 degrees mundane collective orb, and we see subtle aspects need precision to register historically. This direct midpoint is going to be personal orb of 1 through 2 degrees, lesser than 1 degree is ideal, and lesser than 1.5 degrees usable for the mundane collective orb. We see Eberton standard planetary pictures demand exactitude, and we have indirect 8th harmonic midpoint. It's also 1 through 1.5 degrees. I don't know why I said also, because there's no other one that is 1 through 1.5 degrees. With mundane collective orb, we see it is going to be lesser than 0.75 through 1 degrees. We can understand this rationale here is weaker. Only exact hits considered diagnostic. In this table is recommended orbs for collective and mundane analysis, of course. And now let's talk about Pluto and Aquarius and the historical architecture here in more detail. I've made videos about Pluto and Aquarius before, but I want to get into this again because so much is happening. Pluto's orbital period of approximately 248 years means its return to the same sign marks a civilizational quote-unquote echo rather than a personal return. The most recent prior transit of Pluto through Aquarius occurred roughly 1777 through 1778 through about 1798. And preceding that, 1532 through 1553, and earlier windows include 1286 through 1308, several classical and medieval intervals documented by historical astrologers Brennan and Dagan Best, the Astrology Podcast episode 432. So let's go into the 1777 through 1798 window, and this period basically encompasses the American Revolutionary War decisive phase, holy shit, as well as the ratification of the U.S. Constitution, the French Revolution, as well as early Industrial Revolution's acceleration, ideological crystallization, rights of man. So this is very, very, very important to me. So as we can see here, Aquarius is a fixed air sign concerns systems, your networks, ideals of equality, tension between the individual and the collective. And we know that Pluto intensifies, exposes, and regenerates whatever context. The combination produced a radical renegotiation of sovereignty, from divine right monarchy toward popular sovereignty and written constitutionalism. We see critical observation for faculty here. The revolutionary energy was not uniformly libertarian. The terror in France, Haitian revolutions, complexities, and persistence of slavery in the early American Republic demonstrate that Pluto in Aquarius amplifies both the ideal of collective equality and the shadow of ideological purity tests, scapegoating, and new forms of coercion justified in the name of the people, i.e. transgenderism, i.e. this cult, this societal collective warfare that just so happens to be getting more notice. Like, it's been around for a while, but let's talk about 1532 through 1553, and Protestant Reformation's consolidation. The spread of print technology is a democratizing and destabilizing force. Challenges to ecclesial monopoly on truth. Again, the pattern is dual. Liberation of conscience paired with new orthodoxies, confessional warfare, and the weaponization of doctrine. So we see the Pluto and Aquarius window, example 1286 through 1308, the key civilizational markers and archetypal signatures. So we saw the Mongol fragmentation, early Italian city-state ascendancy, late medieval crises of authority, and decentralization of imperial power, seed of Renaissance networks. From 1532 through 1553, Reformation, consolidation, print culture, challenge to papal authority, early scientific stirrings, and democratization of knowledge, new confessional identities, doctrinal warfare. 1777 through 1798, American and French revolutions, rights of man, early industrial acceleration, constitutionalism, as well as popular sovereignty versus terror, system redesign, equality ideology, and coercion. 2023 through 24 through 2044, see AI acceleration, identity politics peak, digital decentralization versus surveillance, and post-institutional trust collapse. We also see network power, gender identity as ideological battleground, narrative as weapon. So this is Pluto and Aquarius historical windows and archetypal signatures. So let's look at gender ideology as Aquarian Plutonian case study, because as someone who's a detransitioner, I can do whatever I want on this channel. So the rapid institutionalization of gender ideology, particularly the claim that subjective gender identity supersedes biological sex in law, medicine, and education, accelerated markedly in the late Pluto and Capricorn period, and has intensified with Pluto's entry into Aquarius. This is not presented as moral judgment, but as structural observation suitable for advanced mundane analysis. Aquarius rules the collective mind, peer networks, and the ideal of the new human liberated from traditional categories. Pluto rules the underworld of power, the non-negotiable, and the capacity to rewrite reality through crises. Their conjunction in the collective field favors ideologies that A. redefine foundational categories, sex, family, body, demand totalizing allegiance, and use institutional capture and social coercion as enforcement mechanisms. Historical parallel: the French Revolution's rapid redefinition of time, revolutionary calendar, of titles, of the very notion of citizenship, and the subsequent terror against those who fail the purity test. Mechanism is analogous. An Aquarian ideal of equality or liberation is plutonized into an instrument of exclusion and redefinition of the human. Contemporary data points for faculty consideration. So this would be medicalization of minors under affirmative care models, like rapid onset gender dysphoria literature goes into that. Legal and educational erasure of sex-based categories in multiple jurisdictions. Corporate and institutional adoption of preferred pronoun and identity protocols as loyalty tests. Parallel rise of surveillance and cancel mechanisms that enforce the new orthodoxy. These phenomena align with Pluto's function of exposing and regenerating the shadow of Aquarius, the risk that the collective good becomes a totalizing ideology that pathologizes dissent. The same transit that can democratize power can also democratize coercion. Collective division, a structural feature. So Aquarius is a sign of polarity. The water bearer pours for the collective, yet the fixed air quality can produce rigid groupthink, and Pluto intensifies splitting. That's very important here. Pluto intensifies splitting. Thus, the current period exhibits not merely disagreement, but ontological schism, competing definitions of reality itself, whether it's biological sex versus gender identity, free speech versus harm, national sovereignty versus global governance. This is the signature of Plutonian transit through an air sign where ideas become battlefields, and the battlefield becomes total. Here is a visual chart examples. We're going to go over outer planet configurations. So this following schematic views illustrate key configurations. Positions are approximate for didactic purposes and based on published ephemerides. Aspects shown are those within collective great orbs. Here is a chart schematic for Pluto ingress into Aquarius, late 2024 configuration emphasis for outer planets near Pluto Aquarius ingress. So And right here on the bottom, I'll just let you know, schematic placement emphasizing Pluto at the Aquarius cusp, as well as Uranus and Taurus, forming a generational square dynamic, Earth versus air and fixed signs. Neptune late Pisces supplies the dissolving idealizing backdrop. Orbs are illustrative, and we see exact dates require ephemeris confirmation for research use. So clearly, we have Pluto right there, right with Aquarius, and then we see Taurus, Uranus and Taurus. What I also want to mention here is the fact that Saturn, Neptune are both in Pisces, and we see Aries, which is also here in the nodes. So here is a midpoint technique in collective analysis. Midpoint is the ecliptic longitude exactly halfway between two planets or sensitive points. When a third body occupies that midpoint within a tight orb, a planetary picture is formed. So A equals BC. In cosmobiology, this is treated as a primary interpretive unit. And for collective work, the most potent pictures involve two or more outer planets, or an outer planet with the lunar nodes, angles of national charts, or eclipse points. So here's a simplified formula. We see that midpoint longitude equals, adjusted for the shorter arc if necessary, and we see indirect midpoints occupying the 45 degrees, 90 degrees, 135 degrees, or 180 degrees from the direct midpoint are secondary and require even tighter orbs. So here's this worked example. Hypothetical outer planet midpoint, we see suppose Uranus is at 20 degrees Taurus, 50 degrees, and Neptune at 28 degrees Pisces, really 358 degrees. The shorter arc midpoint calculation yields a sensitive point near 24 degrees Aquarius, or its opposite. If Pluto, while transiting Aquarius, conjoins that midpoint within 1 degree, the picture of Pluto equals Uranus-Neptune becomes active. Interpretation in collective terms, so sudden Uranus dissolution or idealization Neptune. Alright, of power structures and collective identity, and as Pluto in Aquarius. It's the signature of technological utopianism married to identity dissolution, precisely the field in which gender ideology and AI-mediated social engineering operate. Let's get into this direct midpoint structure schematic. It's a linear representation of a direct midpoint. We see Pluto occupying the Uranus-Neptune midpoint. In practice, the positions are calculated on the 360 degrees ecliptic. The line is a didactic reduction. And here is orb protocol for midpoints on mundane charts. Recommended maximum orbs for research grade work. Direct midpoint occupied by outer planet is going to be lesser than 1.0 degrees. Ideal is lesser than 0.5 degrees for strongest claims. Direct midpoint occupied by personal planet or an angle in a natal chart lesser than 1.5 degrees. Indirect hard aspect midpoints lesser than 0.75 degrees. Wider orbs dilute the signal and increase false positives. Faculty are encouraged to maintain a research log distinguishing exact hits from near hits. Alright, I'm going to talk about PSYOPs, narrative warfare, and generational transits. So, the term PSYOPs, or psychological operations, refers to the planned use of communications and other means to influence the emotions, motives, and reasoning of target audiences. In the astrological frame, excuse me, certain outer planet configurations appear to enlarge the window of opportunity for such influence by weakening shared reality anchors, Neptune, the accelerating technological vectors of dissemination, Uranus, and intensifying power struggles over the definition of the real, Pluto. Pluto in Aquarius specifically favors network rather than hierarchical propaganda, Aquarius, identity and belonging as the primary levers, Aquarius peer group, Pluto intensity. The redefinition of foundational categories is a power move, Pluto. Technological mediation of consensus, Aquarius and modern Uranus. So, historical global warfare periods that coincide with outer planet intensifications often feature not only kinetic conflict, but systematic efforts to reshape the enemy's and one's own population's perception of legitimacy, identity, and future. The American and French Revolutionary eras, the Reformation's pamphlet wars, and 20th century totalitarian mobilizations all exhibit this dual character. The current transit supplies an analogous container. The war is increasingly fought in the domain of category definitions, platform control, and algorithmic amplification. Case linkage from Capricorn to Aquarius. So we can clearly see Pluto's long tenure in Capricorn from 2008 through about 2023-24. It correlated with the exposure and destabilization of institutional authority, financial crises, trust collapse in media and government, rise of populist and anti-establishment movements. So the ingress into Aquarius shifts the battlefield when the system is corrupt to reality itself must be redesigned according to collective ideals. Gender ideology is one prominent theater. We also see climate absolutism, AI governance, and digital identity systems are others. The common thread is the Aquarian claim to redesign the human and social according to an abstract, network-compatible ideal enforced with Plutonian intensity. And here, we're almost finished up. I'm going to go over advanced considerations for faculty research, and these are going to be coming up very soon, so please like, subscribe, comment, share if you care. And these are following methodological recommendations offered for original research programs. So there's about 5 ideas here. First is ingress charts with tidal orbs. Cast the exact moment of Pluto's ingress into Aquarius and subsequent stations for the capital of the polity under study. Note all aspects within 2 degrees and give special weight to contacts with the national charts angles, sun, moon, and outer planets. Generational midpoint stacks. For a given birth cohort, compute the major outer planet midpoints and track transits of personal planets and outer planets over those points across the lifespan. Correlate with documented cultural turning points for that cohort. Eclipse and lunation overlays. Solar and lunar eclipses that fall on outer planet midpoints or on the Aquarius-Leo axes during the 2024 to 2044 window deserve priority attention as potential flashpoints for collective narrative shifts. And comparative historical ephemerides. Align the degree for degree progress of Pluto through Aquarius 1777 through 1798 with the current transit. Note where contemporary events clustered in the same relative degrees that marked revolutionary accelerations in the 18th century. In negative controls, identify periods of high social conflict that lack corresponding outer planet activation. These test the specificity of the model. So here's the limits of the model. Astrology describes timing and archetypal quality, does not dictate moral content or guarantee outcomes. Pluto and Aquarius can manifest as genuine democratization of knowledge and power or as network totalitarianism. The difference lies in the consciousness and ethical choices of the actors within the transit, not in the transit itself. Faculty teaching this material are urged to maintain the distinction between structural description and normative endorsement. And here is the synthesis and also selected references. So, the architecture of the present moment. We stand inside a rare outer planet signature. We know Pluto's newly in Aquarius, Neptune's still in late Pisces, in my opinion, and a lot of other Vedic astrologers. Uranus and Taurus moving toward Gemini. Combination favors the dissolution of old forms, Neptune, the intensification of collective identity struggles and tech power, Pluto and Aquarius, disruptive materialization of new systems, Uranus. Gender ideology is one case among several, illustrates how an Aquarian ideal of liberation from biological constraint can be Plutonized into a system of institutional capture and social division. The historical record of prior Pluto and Aquarius epochs warn that such periods are not gentle. Okay? There's going to be a lot of stuff going on. There's spiritual warfare. They produce both genuine advances in human freedom and new forms of coercion justified by the collective ideal. The task of advanced astrology is not to cheer or condemn, but to map the container with sufficient precision. Midpoints, orbs, planetary pictures, national chart overlays that students and practitioners can orient inside the field rather than being swept by it. This monograph has argued that generational transits supply the archetypal architecture within which psyops and mass psychological reorganization becomes possible. The claim is structural, not conspiratorial. The sky does not write the scripts, it sets the stage dimensions and the emotional lighting. Human agency remains decisive and therefore responsible. Alright, thank you for liking, subscribing, commenting, sharing if you dare and care, and I will see you in the next one. Piscean out.